really striking news coming out of Israel and Gaza overnight. 4 hostages have been rescued by the Israeli military from central Gaza, an operation that was apparently weeks in the planning. Obviously good news that 4 of the hostages have been rescued, but there is a great argument going on this morning, as there always is in terms of the sort of war of information between the two sides, about the damage in terms of civilians, the death in terms of civilians that has been done or undertaken as a result of the attack. Hamas and Palestinian authorities claiming that over 100 people, civilians have been killed. The Israelis saying that it's fewer than 100, whether it's slightly more or slightly fewer. I don't think there's any doubt that civilians have been killed, adding to the already enormous death toll. So we are going to talk a little bit about that, but also, of course, about D-Day as well. And we're going to do so with a man who really knows what he's talking about, and that is Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall, former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff from 2009 to 11, former Senior Middle East Advisor at the Ministry of Defence as well from 2011 to 2015. And indeed, Sir Simon's upcoming book, The House of War, is due to be published in the UK and the US on the 12th of September. So Simon, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Maybe let's just start with that Israel news. Obviously good news that several hostages have been released. I can't imagine what their last, 8, 9 months
245 days or something.
Appalling. Yeah. And who knows what they've had to endure at that time. Clearly, though, as well, at some considerable cost.
Yes, I'm afraid this. One hates using the expression collateral damage.
Yes, I was trying to avoid it.
Yeah, I know it does spring up because it is a shorthand which people do understand. But it's that does always mask the humanitarian issue and the fact that individuals are at the heart of those sort of bald casualty figures, as you say, whichever they are. So it's good the hostages are out. It's unfortunate that Hamas have insisted on keeping the hostages for so long. We know many of them are already dead. We suspect a lot more will have been killed, but we still don't know. They sit at the heart of a peace plan, which, as you know, a peace plan, a ceasefire offer, which we're hoping can come to some fruition. But there are very hardliners on both sides, as you know, and it's a very, very such a complex situation. But the Hamas hardliners are quite prepared to sacrifice Palestinian lives in order to drive their agenda. And of course, hardliners within the Israeli coalition, which Netanyahu has, are also quite hard over. And this is proving to be an extremely difficult cycle of violence to bring to some conclusion.
Do you think that there is any prospect or any hope for the Biden peace plan, which is, he says, an Israeli peace plan in effect, but do you think there is any prospect of it getting any traction?
Well, I'm very conscious. I think that Netanyahu is going across the States, I think, to try and make up another pitch to Congress. And he knows he'll have a very willing audience, of course. There's great support for the state of Israel there. And, of course, it's an election year in a presidential election year in America. America's the biggest backer of Israel. Of course, many other backers of the right of the state of Israel to live in peace and hopefully come to some arrangement. So it's so tied up with domestic politics, both in Israel, locally in the region, and of course in America. And it is beginning, of course, to feature in our own domestic politics as we go forward to our own election on the 4th of July, Lewis.
But is there any sense? Do you think, Sir Simon, there is any sense in which, even in the narrow, well, it's not narrow particularly, but in the terms that Netanyahu, the objectives he set himself, let's leave aside the humanitarian situation, which is appalling in all sorts of ways, just for a moment. But in terms of his meeting his own objectives, which has been to destroy Hamas as a military force, Hamas are still attacking Israel sporadically from within the Gaza Strip. So we're what is it now, sort of 8-9 months on, and there's still clearly may have degraded them, but they're still an operative force, despite all of this death and all of this suffering.
Well, of course, it's a question of capability. And, of course, any attack on Israel gets news headlines. You're slightly back to what it was pre-7th of October, where that, one has to say, complete failure of imagination or intelligence allowed Hamas to develop the capability to carry out a really extraordinarily complex, very devastating attack. That is probably now would be very, very difficult for them to do again. What we also lose sight of is, of course, what happens in Hezbollah. And at the heart of it, of course, is a lot to do with Iranian domestic politics and the death of President Raisi. The export of Iran's own domestic politics into the region via the sort of Shia in the Houthis, the Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, rather, in Syria, the support of Iran for Hamas, and of course Iran are very keen to ensure that Hamas keep a hard line there, because it really helps them in some ways. And then of course you link it even wider to what China might have an interest. You link it to Russia. It's an extraordinary distraction from Putin's problems in Ukraine. And it's the old cry I used to say to my American colleagues, if you want to understand the problem, you've got to get yourself a bigger map, because the connectivity is huge here, at every level. And of course, it's been conducted on social media, through the news airwaves. And as you said, the battle for the narratives.
We'll talk a little bit about D-Day in a minute and what happened over the course of the weekend. But I mean, just thinking in terms of the general election campaign itself, which we're obviously in the middle of, we're also in the middle of perhaps the most perilous, in all sorts of ways. You've just alluded to some of the reasons why, but one of the most perilous geopolitical moments that this country has faced, certainly since the end of the Cold War, even for some time before that. Perhaps not surprisingly, because they tend to be dominated by domestic issues. Those geopolitical events, foreign affairs, whatever, very low down the agenda. Are you a little disappointed by the fact that the two leaders are talking about it so seldom? Because it is very important.
I'm very, very disappointed, to be honest with you. And it's what I describe as our 30-year holiday from history is over. I was around, I was on the German border in 1989, because that's what the British Army were doing. There was Ireland, of course, and our overseas commitments. But we were still facing the Soviet Union then. The wall collapsed. And then there was too much hubris. Everybody wanted to take a peace dividend. Understandably, Western politicians wanted to invest in healthcare and welfare state. Defence went onto the back burner. But it is staggering since 2003, 8, 14, you name it, Georgia, Crimea, Ukraine, that we still cannot get defence and geostrategy up the agenda. And it's not just Britain, it's France, it's Germany, it's Italy. And nobody wants to confront the reality that the world has changed. It's very, very dangerous. Defence is not simply spending, it's investment. Because you can either spend your way, you can raise taxes, or you can borrow more money. And of course, every Western government, to an extent, has backed itself into a corner and dare not have a grown-up debate about meeting these challenges.
Patrick Windsor, the diplomatic editor of The Guardian, has written a very good piece today. I don't know if you've seen it, but he quotes Timothy Snyder, the very respected historian, particularly of Eastern Europe, suggesting that we are in 1938. Or an equivalent moment thereof. And that Ukraine, in terms of their actions in fighting the Russians for so long, are basically delaying us getting to 1939, but sort of decrying the idea that there is less discussion about this, or less sense of urgency in Europe in particular about it. Would you agree with that? Do you think we are potentially at a pre-war moment?
I think there's always potentially in a pre-war moment. That's the old cry of, if you want peace, prepare for war. We haven't really. Thank God NATO is still there. It's the most successful defensive military alliance in history. Thank God the Americans appear to still be committed to NATO, because let's not beat about the bush here. 90% of NATO's potency comes from the American commitment. There's ludicrous ideas of building up a European capability that might match the loss of the American capability. But lessons from history are important, and I worry about the quality of leadership. Macron talks a good game. I don't think Schultz does. I'm not entirely sure many British politicians seem to have the confidence to challenge this. My worry, of course, is always...
His eye off the ball?
Sorry?
Do you think Sunak has taken his eye off the ball? Do you think he's very interested?
I think I've worked close enough to governments. It's a hard, grinding business. You know it well, Lewis, and you are driven by events, dear boy, events. You're driven by internal politics, etc. You're driven by the lack of money. But it does worry me that we have reached a stage, and we've been in it for quite a long time since Russia took the Crimea, of not being prepared to confront the fact that Russia has some sort of revanchist, imperialist / narrative that it's
with China.
And you put China alongside that, and all the threats that emanate from Iran and its use of proxies, etc. And to my mind, of course, the leadership would be saying this is not just spending on defence, it's investing in defence. Because with defence, you get education, you get skills, you get R&D, you get industrial, you get employment, you get diplomatic clout, you get political clout. And actually, the British public are not mugs. They understand that, as Dennis Healy said, defence is the ultimate social security.